thank you for coming on, David. And yeah, just to start off, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe talk to your background as an industrial designer, entrepreneur, all before?
Okay. All right. Well, firstly, my degree is actually in fine art. So I went to the School of Art in Hobart. I finished my degree in about 1979, so a good long time ago. So the course that I did was actually at the School of Art in Hobart. We did a sort of a foundation year, and that covered sculpture, printmaking, and painting, and so on, various aspects of sort of being an artist. But they also had an industrial designer there, sort of doing a design sort of component. And one way or another, I sort of end up going down that road. I was actually pretty interested in doing ceramics, but the ceramics lecturer kind of put me off in the sense, so few people really have a lot of success in that arena. So, I opted to go sort of down a more of an industrial design path, but that kind of morphed after a while into a designer maker path. Basically what happened was that the college itself started to invite people from overseas to come in as designers, sort of in-house for a while. And so the college invited people to come in. There's a proper term for it, but can't think of it right now. Anyway, so we had these people come from the UK, from Japan, from America, and they were focused on design in wood. And the reason for that was because at that point in time, there was a lot of controversy about the dams that the Hydroelectric Commission in Tasmania wanted to build in the southwest of Tasmania. So sort of they'd already done a huge dam for hydro at Lake Pedder, which had upset a lot of people, and they had their heart set on all these other sort of wild rivers, damming those to create hydroelectric schemes. In fact, I mean, sort of the joke in Tassie was that eventually all you'd see is a few sort of mountains poking up out of the water, They had sort of the hydroelectric scheme hydro was such a powerful body in Tasmania. And if you've got a powerful body and you're good at designing dams, you don't really want to stop designing dams if you can get away with it. So they'd already put in enough dams and enough sort of hydro schemes that there were schemes that weren't even operational, but they still wanted to build more dams. So there's a lot of controversy, and basically in building those dams, they were flooding all these areas that had lots of natural forests and so on. So there was this sort of swing towards how we would use that timber under those circumstances. So how the timber would be cut, and sort of how that resources could have a maximum value, and the idea was that the maximum value would come from fine crafted products made from that timber. So the not so much, actually I suppose the course itself did in fact start to move in that direction, but prior to that happening, and when the course was more sort of industrial design based, we had done a lot of sort of projects. And one of those, as students, and one of those projects was in fact street furniture. So it was for Elizabeth Mall in Hobart, so basically a few of us students were involved in that process of designing furniture for Elizabeth Street Mall in Hobart. In my case, it was a rubbish bin, a drinking fountain, and I sort of associated with the rest of the furniture for that project. My part of the project won a design award. It won a Litter Control Council of South Australia design award. I got a little sort of glass apple for my trouble with a little silver base on it. So although the die really wasn't set in relation to sort of me becoming focused on street furniture, it was kind of the beginning of that kind of thing. I'd also done a bit of street furniture around the college as well. So I'd done a round bin with a little yellow top on it, which was dubbed the Golden Brick, which was a bit unkind, but did have that sort of shape to it a bit. And I'd also designed a play structure for the college. They had a creche there, and I had designed a play structure for the creche. And I also had designed a play structure for the Hobart Airport for when the kids were waiting for the plane and so on. So there was some involvement there in sort of aspects of potential street furniture. I'd done some models for some other kind of climbing structures and stuff like that.
I couldn't believe how small the Hobart Airport was when I was there. It's more of a little shed than an airport.
It's getting pretty fancy now.
Yeah, it looks fancy. Yeah, it's cool, but
yeah, they're working on that. I think my play structure is long gone.
Yeah.
So basically, the street furniture thing had come into play at university, but I'd also got interested in the designer maker thing. And as I say, these guys had come over, or people had come over from these various countries as designers in residence. That's what they would say. There was Ashley Cartwright from the UK, Hugh Scriven from the UK, John Makepeace, who was pretty famous at the time from the UK, Michael Jean Cooper from the States, who was doing all these. His family had been held up in must have had a shop, and they'd been held up, and so he'd done all these kind of crazy sort of he was into sort of hot roddy motorbike things or something. Anyway, he'd done these sort of motorbikes with sort of guns kind of incorporated into them instead of engines and stuff. And he was doing this amazing sort of laminated sort of forms using sort of in space, like he was just kind of getting sort of bungee cord and making up these laminates and then putting glue on them and then sort of wrapping bungee cord around them and then sort of hand forming them in space until the glue set. So there was some really interesting people, and they were getting staggering amounts of money for their work. So everybody thought, oh man, this is cool. I could do that. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. You have to sort of build a really serious reputation to get kind of value for money, for your time, your hours that you put into coming up with the idea in the first place.
Yeah.
And then making the thing. I had various exhibitions of that kind of work in Hobart and in Sydney. And I ended up getting a crafts board grant to study in the UK and to study design and making in the UK at a place called Rycote College, which is in a little town called Tame near Oxford in the UK. So I went there for the years 82, 83, and I did sort of a City and Guilds qualification as a craftsman. It was really more about craftsmanship than the design side of it, but nevertheless, we got to design a variety of pieces. An object for the beautification of Head and Shoulders is one of them, which was basically a mirror. But one of the really interesting things we got to do was we could go to the places like the Victoria and Albert Museum, Museum, and the curators there would pull out an object, because one of our projects was to design a replica of an original piece of furniture from any era. So someone even got to sort of physically touch a 3,000-year-old stool from an Egyptian tomb.
The V&A Museum's amazing. There's such amazing artifacts in there.
Yeah, and one of the guys did a Chinese chair from one of the dynasties.
Did you go into the really big room with the massive paintings? like with
Oh
like high
yeah.
ceilings. Yeah, I was working in there, and there was this cameraman with big like microphones set up, and when he was taking them down, he swung around too fast and knocked a massive chunk of concrete off like the balcony. And you should have seen the look on the lady's face when he did it. She was like, "What? What are you doing?"
Oh yeah.
Because it's like a
I mean,
500-year-old building at least.
oh, it's just extraordinary. I mean, Tudor building facades,
Yeah.
a massive sort of arm from an Egyptian somewhere, like a whole forearm taking up multiple gallery spaces. I mean,
Mm.
just massive. The Brits did do a big raid on the world's
Yeah,
art.
it's interesting. All these museums that are just have all these artifacts stolen from other countries.
I know it's just crazy. But to put into some perspective, Australians can be pretty silly as well because I went to a gallery which featured Art Deco furniture, and most of it had actually come from Australia. And there were things like Bugatti chairs, Jacques Ruhlmann cabinets, and stuff like that, like super famous, wildly expensive objects. And they'd actually been gathered by an Australian who had tried to give them to the Australian government, from some sort of museum, sort of. There was a lot of it, but in the end, the Australian government knocked it back, so it'd end up back in the UK or in the UK,
Mm.
in a gallery that wasn't climate controlled, and stuff was falling to bits. And I remember I went to a gallery in Paris, and they had some Jacques Ruhlmann cabinets and Eileen Gray and stuff like that, all that, Corbusier and so on. They had original pieces, and the Ruhlmann cabinet in particular, I think it was something like $20,000 in 1983.
Wow.
It's what it'd be worth now, but it was just mind-boggling, and unfortunately, the Australian government hadn't sort of seen the value at that time, or just didn't understand
Mm.
the importance of those objects.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's so. The overseas thing, as you can hear from what I'm saying, was a pretty amazing experience for me because of the sort of art background. I spent a lot of time in galleries looking at art. I mean, the British Museum, but National Portrait Gallery, Tate Modern, all the Serpentine Gallery, all those sort of places stick in my head, and it's a long time ago now. So it was a fantastic experience. We got to see some good bands as well, of course. Couldn't get a ticket to INXS though, which was really, really unfortunate. Excuse me. But I did get to see you too, as well.
That's good. Yeah.
And I saw it's interesting about the culture of Australia, because Midnight Oil were playing in Hobart probably a month or so before I went to the UK, and the concert was massive, and they did an after concert party in a little bar in Hobart and so on, and like they were just total gurus at the time of the music world in Australia. But I went to see them in London, and there was about 20 people, and most of them, there was a few Australians and a few New Zealanders, and the rest were sort of people that they had met at the backpackers, a few Americans and Canadians and so on.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I went to a concert on Friday night, and this DJ is like the world-renowned. I think he's from Netherlands. A really world-renowned DJ, and they didn't even sell out until like Tuesday last week. Whereas if it was in Europe, it would have sold out in like an instant, probably. Yeah.
Look, it's funny. I went to see a band called Clint. Oh no, not Clint. I did go and see them, but Juliet and the Licks here in Brisbane one time. Now, Juliet and the Licks turned out to be Juliette Lewis, the famous actress.
Yeah.
She was, and her drummer in that band's Dave Grohl.
No, Dave. Yeah.
Well, nobody kind of knew that, and so I went to see this thing at the zoo here in Brisbane, and there's a handful of people there, and bloody Dave Grohl was there playing the drums and playing guitar.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. Like
It's funny how these things happen.
It's pretty crazy.
When I was in London, Dave, Dave Gilmore, the guitarist from
Yeah,
Pink Floyd, he was just
absolutely.
playing like he was busking basically out the front of the V&A when I was there.
Yeah.
Not really busking, but he was just like there, like it wasn't a paid concert or anything. He's just playing, and everyone was just crowded around him, listening to him. Like, yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I went for a walk across the Sagrada Familia. It must have been in 83 or 84. And there was this sort of group of musicians, or what I assume were musicians. And at that stage, you could walk across between the towers. I guess you can do it now. I don't know. They're moving along with that thing. It's getting a long way towards being finished. But
Mm.
anyway, I approached these people, and they sort of had these crazy hairdos of that sort of period, some pimply sort of girlfriends and stuff. And I said, oh, you look like you must be in some rock band. And the bloke said to me, yeah, Spandau Ballet. I said, I suppose you want free tickets to the concert, you can F off. Because I didn't recognize them.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, dear, very funny. I had lots of kind of I can certainly recommend the grand tour. The old English idea of a grand tour. It really did sort of help me a lot. I
Yeah.
went to the Milan to Milan, of course,
Yep.
because it was the Sotzas era,
Mm.
and so it was the era of the Memphis group, Ettore Sotzas, and all that. And they had a shop in Milan that was specialising in those products, in that furniture,
Mm.
and also just general commercial furniture. And I got a very big and very quick lesson in the realities of the furniture world, because I approached the salesperson there, and I was kind of I was 29. I was kind of starstruck by the whole Memphis thing, of course. It's pretty amazing, some incredible looking objects. So I said to the salesperson, do you sell any of this stuff? Who do you sell it to? He said, look, we sell hardly any of it. It goes to a few galleries and a few collectors. What we really sell is this. And he took me out the back and had all this multicolored MDF commercial office
Yeah.
furniture. And that's what they're actually selling.
Yeah.
I mean, my designs at the time were definitely influenced by that sort of era of action. And the other thing that sort of occurred at that time that sort of sticks in my mind is that part of the deal with getting the Craftsboard grant was actually going back to Tasmania and doing a talk to the students, and so and in fact doing a tour around Australia and talking about what I'd learned and so on.
Mm.
But in fact, in the end, the Craftsboard didn't really ask me to do that, but the college where I'd gone to the School of Art in Hobart, I was, put front and center in front of the students to talk about what I'd learned. Well, in Tassie, as I was saying, there's a lot of craftwood timber because of all this dam action and all that kind of stuff. But in the UK, if you look at the history of furniture in the UK, you can sort of see there was sort of a early period was sort of oak. Well, they cut down an awful lot of oak trees and they started to run out of trees, and the trees were protected by the royalty. So a lot of the trees and so on, there's a whole sort of structure which is kind of still kind of in place in some ways, but basically they sort of ran out of resources. They cut down too many oak trees. So the original sort of furniture was kind of things like cabinets that would hold church treasures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Chairs, I mean, usual sort of kind of things, benches and so on, primitive and semi-primitive furniture. And as they progressed through various periods, they started to use elm and sycamore and all these other different species of timbers, but it's a small island, they run out of resources pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So they went offshore, and they went to Cuba and they cut down Cuban mahogany, and they went to all these other places. And so the history of the furniture in the UK and it is about the resources that they had to actually make the furniture out of, and sort of progression in the sort of stylization and so on, of course.
Mm.
But basically, by the time I was there, they were very precious about how they used material. So, for example, a designer maker would make like dressmaker patterns out of tissue paper, and they would go to the mill, and at the mill they would cut the timber. So if they're cutting up an oak tree, they cut it from edge to edge to waney edge to waney edge, the whole, so they wouldn't waste any timber at all. And the designer maker would take their pattern and put it on the piece of timber to make sure that they were getting, the maximum cut. And so it wasn't conservation, strictly speaking, for conservation reasons. It was conservation because they had to.
Yeah.
Cost of the material. But they're also using a lot of veneers. And there's a guy called Fred Bayer doing some really wild, it's well worth looking up. He was doing this really crazy sort of vibrantly coloured sycamore veneer pieces of furniture. He did, I don't know whether you know the band Roxy Music, but he did the furniture for Phil Manzanera's house, which was kind of like an Art Deco house and very round.
Good.
He did a table for, I think, King's College in Oxford and stuff like that. Really out there kind of designs.
Yeah.
So my experience over there was to understand that, the preciousness of materials and so on, and how, and sort of an early understanding of conservation of materials. So anyway, I'm doing this lecture at in Hobart at the School of Art, and I'm talking about, and I'm showing slides. So I've recorded all this stuff. So I've taken photos, and I've got slides as you did back then. No digital back then, just slides and so on. And I'm showing this work. I'm showing other people's work. I'm showing the things I've done myself because everybody's got an ego. But I'm showing mostly the work that I've seen, and I'm talking about the people I've met and the processes they're using. And the lecturer there, a guy called Peter Taylor, the sculpture lecturer, he pops up and he's quite outraged, and he's quite outraged by the talk that I'm having, and he says, in deference to my learned colleague here, but in Tasmania we use real materials, we use real wood. And I thought, can I put it this way? I thought, you dickhead. I mean, I'm there, I'm talking about, why they've got to this point, why they're using those materials. And this person who's supposed to be a sophisticated lecturer is not understanding the importance of credibility, what's credible about what I'm saying. And this is in front of a group of students. This is just kind of, I had serious words to him afterwards. I didn't embarrass him at the time, but I just, I think I used a few expletives in my conversation with him afterwards because it was just crazy. So all in all, an incredible learning experience. And then sort of my career morphed into working as an in-house designer for a variety of people. I worked for a company called Namco for a while. I'll probably cut through a few of the people I work for, but I'm sorry about you might have to cut that one out. But I worked for a company called Namco, who were famous for doing pots and pans, but also did furniture for offices and so on. So I was employed to design office furniture. And the interesting part of the experience was that I would, and I mean, I guess it was before people got too excited about workplace health and safety, maybe, but I would draw things up, and then I'd go down on the shop floor and I'd make them. So they had some sort of semi-automatic machines. So a lot of their work was tubular steel furniture, basic tubular steel furniture. So one of the tasks they set me was to make a frame out of tube that used no welding, because welding costs time and money, and they didn't have robots at that stage. So I got this massive, big, long length of tube and put it in this folding machine. and it sort of flew up in the air on one side and flew up in the air on the other side because, in order to get to the point where so basically it was a skid-based chair. So it sort of went across, down, back, up, in, on an angle, think back and then up. So it was quite a few bends involved. And they also had a machine there that would punch holes through the tube. So and when they punched the hole, it would do a countersinking effect. And so you pop a screw in. So the chair was held together by the plywood suite that you sat on, which had T-nuts in it. You know what they are.
Yep.
And in the back. So the chair worked. It was sort of rigid, totally rigid once the back and seat were fixed to it. But the guys on the shop floor said they couldn't do it. Now, I mean, these were experienced workmen on the shop floor, and they reckon what I had done they couldn't do. So that chair didn't go anywhere.
Maybe you need to bring it back.
Sorry?
Maybe you need to bring it back in 2023.
Oh, I don't know. But I mean, so I'm going through a really interesting learning experience here, because the other thing that happened was I designed a whole lot of new pieces of furniture, and they went to the Sydney Furniture Fair, and one of them won a design award. But the manufacturer, they didn't produce them. What they said to me was, well, it's not a catalogue product. And basically what they had was Me Too products. So basically they would look at what other people were selling and then they'd make the same thing.
Yeah.
They didn't realise that the point of difference gave them an edge in terms of, firstly, the point of difference, something different, but also that they weren't in direct competition. So it wasn't sort of a fight to the bottom as far as price goes.
Yeah.
So that company failed because they simply didn't understand the value of original design, and they didn't know how to promote it. So that's kind of like an early experience of that kind of thing. That was probably my main sort of working experience in Tasmania. But then I got a job. Well, I'd been doing a little bit of lecturing at the School of Art in Hobart on a part-time basis, but I got a job as a full-time lecturer at the art school in Launceston in designing wood.
Yep.
And typically of me, I was sort of still exploring the realities around, what I was learning and also what the students were learning. So I did two things. One thing was I made a lot of different pieces. So it had full facilities there. So I made a lot of different pieces in different processes. So I did a laminated timber piece, and it was basically it was a rocking chair for mothers that are for feeding babies. So it's sort of a low rocking chair. I had a local fabric artist do the fabric for it. So that was one piece. I did a series of turn pieces on the lathe. I could use all that equipment then. I made up a special mold. I made the lampshade in Japanese paper and fiberglass resin and so on. So I was experimenting, but I was also kind of hoping that the students were paying attention to all these different techniques that I was using. I did pieces with veneers because I'd learnt that process when I was in the UK. I did a fully machined piece. I did a bookshelf for my mum, and which she still has. Well, yeah. Which I'm about to reacquire because she passed away a few weeks ago, sadly. So my idea was that I'd be doing these pieces in front of the students, and I'd be showing them these techniques without actually saying, pay attention, watch me. It's as if I was just building things, but I was really hoping that they would pay attention. Now, the other thing was that a lot of these people had saved money to be involved in that course over a period of time. Some had worked in mines and stuff like that. So I was really concerned about, them actually learning something that they could make, you know, a living from. So what I did was I took them around to see all the local designer makers that were, you know, quite famous at that stage. And there's a guy called Kevin Perkins who designed a lot of the furniture that went into the new Parliament House, which is not so new anymore, but at the time. So he was doing churches and pews and stuff like that. He was really a very famous character at that stage. But he'd set himself up many years before he'd bought some land down near in the Huon Valley, and he built himself sort of a hippie house, you know, the pole house, hand-built house. He'd scored some second-hand machinery which he'd set up. So he'd set himself up. He bought a heap of timber, you know, whilst it was cheap, and he had this whole setup. And so I asked him about, you know, what it was like and how he'd gone about it and what it had cost him to set this up, you know, how much basically the land was and what it cost him to build his house and all those kind of things, and how he'd sourced materials and so on. So he built all this stuff, you know, for next to nothing because he was hands-on and because he'd done it, you know, back in the day kind of thing. So I said to him, you know, what's it worth now, Kev, you know? He said, oh, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the point I was trying to make was that, you know, although he'd managed to get himself in this position, and he was also doing a part-time lecturing to actually get a sort of a steady sort of income. The fact of the matter is that for these students setting up to be in a position like him was going to cost them hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And that was back in sort of we're talking about 1987 at this stage, so it's a good while ago. And I mean, even then, I guess, relatively speaking, it was quite expensive, you know, to set up a workshop, to have all the right equipment, have dust extraction. And the fact of the matter is, it's sort of a lot of the glues and varnishes and even, you know, blackwood are quite carcinogenic. They're quite toxic.
Yeah.
It's not a very healthy thing to do. And I mean, he was able to demand a decent price for his stuff, but because he was famous. But even so, he was still subsidizing his work, his ability to do that kind of work by lecturing. And the fact of the matter is that sort of the other people I took them to see was a similar scenario. So having gone down that road, I went to my head of school and I said, look, you know, I am really concerned about the future of these students. And I think if I'm honest about it, what I really need to do is maybe make a move, go find out, you know, what jobs are available in this sector directly myself. So I really love to come back, but I'd like to come back and restructure the course around what I've learned. So, you know, how do you feel about me going away for 1 or 2 years kind of thing? Said, no, good idea. I mean, now we're talking about sort of institutions where people generally had sort of got a job in their sort of 20s or 30s and they've stayed there until they retired. And the problem I had with that was that there was no development. And we're talking about, you know, the importance of people, you know, finding a career, especially you know, when it's a full-on hands-on thing. I mean, you know, it's painting, sculpture, all those sort of things. It's hard, you know, it's very hard to make a living in those areas. But what we do is kind of semi-industrial, even at sort of a designer craftsman level. It's still a product. It's still a thing, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, people have got families. They've got overheads, they've got to support themselves. So to me, that was important. Whereas to a lot of the lecturers at the art schools, it wasn't important because they had their 85K a year or whatever it was. They did their 2 or 3 days a week contact. They could afford to indulge themselves in pontificating about art and the sort of things that they did and having exhibitions and having sabbaticals and getting grants and so on. But that wasn't for everybody. That was for them.
Yeah.
And so I was concerned about everybody as opposed to them. And I didn't want to be one of those guys. I could have been. I mean, it's a fantastic job. I was doing 3 days a week. I had Mondays and Fridays off, and I could indulge myself, and I could work in the workshop, and I could do things and make things, and I could make money and still get my wage. But as far as I was concerned, it wasn't good enough.
Mm.
And I thought, as I say, the honest thing to do is to go and see where I could take this. So I went to Melbourne, and I went to a couple of industrial design firms, and they said my work was too arty, which was, probably at the time fair comment. Same thing happened in Sydney. I came to Brisbane in sort of 87, and it was just pre-Expo in 88.
Mm.
And Brisbane was on a roll, and they needed anybody who could push a pencil, anybody could design anything.
Yeah.
Just a lot of action around. Expo had sort of changed the perception of Brisbane. So I got work up here, and I worked with a company called Natura. And what I learned from him was that you could be a bit of a shyster if you wanted to be, and you could, maybe some of the clients are a bit unsophisticated and didn't really understand, the value of things. So you could charge them lots of money for something that didn't cost much money. And I didn't really like that either.
Mm.
So the one thing about that particular job was that he was strict about when you started work, when you finished work, for your benefit. So which I, in retrospect, having worked for other people, I realised was a really good thing. That he realised that you needed some, work-life balance.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, especially moving into the modern day.
Yeah. So, but whereas as I continue this conversation, it wasn't always like that for me. So
yeah.
So the next job I had was probably with a guy called Ross Howard, and he was doing a variety of fit outs. We did a fit out for Ansett Airlines, as they were back then. We did their boardroom table, and I did their boardroom table. I did some sort of reception chairs, or kind of like folding chairs, with canvas. And Swiss Insurance and various others. I did a kind of all sorts of interesting things, including a directory board, which was like a big opening book thing for some high rise. But one of the things he asked me to do was the designs for furniture for it was for a modelling academy. And so my idea was, okay, well, mum comes in with her, amazingly good looking 16-year-old or whatever. And it's all about them. It's all about their sense of their beauty, or whatever it is, in that context. And so what I wanted to do was sort of frame them. So when they came in, there were sort of mirrors strategically placed, and sort of the furniture's, a lot of white, a lot of plain furniture, to so all about that person, male or female, if like that these days, all about that person, and not really about the space being suitable to frame that person, I suppose, is what I'm alluding to here. Well, Ross saw it more in terms of Bordello-esque. So Ross saw it more in terms of red velvet tassels. And I said to him, mate, that's just, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing that. That's just wrong. Mum comes in with a daughter, and you bring them into a brothel. I said, no, not doing it. He said, well, if either you do it or you F off. I said, it's the latter. I'm out of here. So that was the end of that job.
Yeah.
And so I worked for Ainsley Bell and Murchison. They were doing various sort of shopping centres and stuff like that. And I think they employed me to see whether they actually needed to employ someone with my skill set. I don't think they really wanted to. I think they just kind of did it. And I didn't stay there that long. I did quite a lot of work for them on some projects down around Broad Beach Oasis, I think it's called. I did a lot of the fit out for that thing. But it was kind of like, I was trying to explain it to someone the other day. It was kind of like, you start at the window as sort of the golden haired boy and you end up in the middle of the room. In my case, because I'm not much of a prima donna. I'm not much of a, like I'm not good at blowing my own trumpet. So, but I'm competent. So I would just, so they realised that I was competent, but they wouldn't necessarily understand the value of that competence. Because it looked easy, because I was producing things fast, and it looked easy. If he can do it, anyone can do it. It's kind of the attitude I think that I came up against, and that pervaded right through to Media 5, who was the last sort of major company I worked with on the Gold Coast at Southport, and I worked in the interior section there, and we were designing for Gold Coast International, so. And the Skase resorts, up in Port Douglas and in Surfers Paradise. And the major project for me was Royal Pines Resort, which is still there. And the sort of the style of the interior designers there was more sort of heavily sort of a lot of gold, a lot of brocade, a lot of silk, a lot of materials like that. And if they used silk, they had to put backing on it, and it was kind of like I think, what did they call it at the time? I don't know. Is it New York Eclectic or something? I don't know. Anyway, the long and short of it was that it was, highly stylized, kind of semi oldie worldy. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but cane, a lot of materials that really didn't have a lot of longevity in them, in my opinion. And so I opted for stone, stainless steel, leather, those kind of materials, and sort of a very contemporary kind of look for the project. And I had a fair bit of difficulty getting that through. So I would, and it was it's still an era of drawing things on paper. So I was a bit wicked. I would draw things and that they kind of liked. And then after they'd signed the bottom of the page, I'd change them to what I liked. And so they ended up with a lot of leather, steel, and stone, and it was there for a long time. Most of the projects that they would do would last maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 years max. We went down to Royal Pines Resort for my mum's 70th or 80th, maybe 80th birthday. And it would have been maybe 15 years since I'd worked on that project, and the stuff was still there.
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of stuff we need to be designing, furniture that lasts.
Yeah.
Before, when you were mentioning MDF, I was just thinking, like, I was at my girlfriend's dad's house last night, and he had all this MDF plastic veneer IKEA furniture. And it's already swelling. Like he's had it for like 6 months, and it's already got like random swelling on between.
Oh yes, a lot of humidity around. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like these things just aren't made to last at all.
No, don't work in this climate.
They don't work. Specifically, don't work in this climate. They're designed for European climate. A lot of them. Yeah.
I mean, the leather thing, has its issues here because unless it's climate controlled, you're going to end up with mold as a result. Leather's tricky as well. And that's a lesson I've learned since moving to Queensland. But I think that's the point, isn't it? I mean, everything that we do, and I think the point of this conversation with you is that whatever we do is basically, you know, a learning process. It's very hard to translate that process into a young mind. You know, Bernard Shaw said, you know, youth was wasted on the young and wisdom was wasted on the old. And it's kind of unfortunate that that is in fact the case. I mean, you know, we're in a period of wars still, and why? You know, why is that so? It just doesn't just, you know, there's so much history to point out that it's a bad idea, but
Yeah.
and so without getting too deeply into that sort of stuff, so having worked at Media 5, which is now DBI, and has been for some time, what was good about that was, and what was good about the process of working for these various commercial companies, commercial design companies, was that I met people. I learned about the industry in Queensland, learned about who's who in the zoo, sort of thing. And so basically in 1991, the government here decided it'd be a really good idea to tax the Japanese developers that were doing these big projects on the Gold Coast. I think that was a factor. And there was suddenly there was a sort of recession kind of thing in the industry, this pullback in the industry. And the company that I'd been working for, Media 5, had about 150 people, and they retrenched everybody. Suddenly basically the work stopped, the projects were just put on hold, so they retrenched everybody. And when they did that, the interesting thing about that was that, and this goes back to part of what we were talking about before, about people working all sorts of hours when they work for these big companies. There's a lot of sycophants there. So there's a lot of people that came in, they were wearing suits, they had ties on, and they would come in, you know, at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they wouldn't leave till 10 o'clock at night. And they'd talk to each other, they'd talk to the management and so on. But the people who were actually doing the work, a lot of them were, you know, there's one guy, he was an old surfer, he had hair down to his bum, you know, and he was in my section, and that guy called Greg Lark, he very clever guy, but you know, he looked like he looked like an old hippie, you know, he looked like, you know, actually no, I won't go down into it too far, but you get where I'm going with this. And I used to come in shorts, and it was the 1 year they sensibly had daylight saving in Queensland, just that 1 year.
Oh, I wish they kept it.
And so I'd ping off at 5 o'clock, which was, you know, a 4 o'clock, and go for a surf. Fantastic, you know. But these other people would hang around. And so when you know, things went off the rails with the client base, they suddenly just retrenched everybody. And in my case, I was pretty friendly with some of the associate directors, and they said, you know, basically I was a casual dresser. Nothing about what I was actually producing, but I was a casual dresser, so therefore acting age, you know, obviously not professional. Well, the thing is that they got left with these suits. Well, the suits didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
So suddenly they realised that they had all these suits, but they weren't the designers. They weren't the people doing the work.
Yeah.
They retrenched all the people actually doing the work, including myself.
You do find that with offices a lot, where there's like always people who kind of are there all day, but they're not actually doing that much. And then like a lot of the time they're the people that are thought of as the, you know, the best, because they're spending all the time, even if their work's very limited. Yeah.
And they're taking the credit for the ideas, of course. That's the other side of the coin. So they're presenting the ideas more often than not to management, you see.
Yeah.
They're not drawing them up, but they're presenting the ideas. So the assumption is that the ideas were theirs. Actually, one other thing that I learned too was that, which was useful down the track, was that they would have they'd have reps come in, and the rep to talk about, you know, the product that they wanted to sell, and this leads into a little story about, you know, what it's like to work in those places. But they had these reps come in, and the reps would provide lunch and stuff. Well, most of the time, people wouldn't be paying attention. So, you know, and I watched the various reps and how they presented their ideas to the group, or their products to the group. And I kind of learned a bit about, you know, what you needed to do to get attention from the people that you're talking to, you know, a few jokes, a few expletives, a few somethings that just sort of, you know, cause them to pay attention, apart from just chewing on the free taco, you know. And the other thing that just popped into my head there was that's associated with this is that the interior designers would ask people to send samples in, and in this instance, a particular chair, it was a Poltrona Frau. Do you know the company? And yeah, it's an Italian company, and it's a very high-end company that produces beautiful leather furniture. And so this red tub chair came up from down south, and I remember it costing, the chair was worth, you know, $1,000 or something. It was a lot of money. It was a really nice special chair, and it had upholstered legs and red leather, and it's a beautifully detailed thing. Anyway, so this came up, and the head interior designer said, you know, can you copy that? Can you copy that thing? I said, I can copy that thing, but someone sent that up. I mean, someone that sent that to us, you know, I think it had cost $300 or something like that to freight the thing up. You know, this is back in 88, probably a fair bit of money then, you know. And like they were plonking themselves on it. They were, you know, I was getting ink stains on it. I mean, you know, like it was, I was outraged. No, I said no. I mean, I just thought it was just such poor and unprofessional way for someone to act. And so, and you know, very disrespectful of that person who'd gone to the trouble of sending this. So they had no intention of buying those chairs, no intention at all. They simply wanted to copy the bloody thing, which I just was outrageous. And I don't know whether it's like that now, and I don't want to cast those sort of nasturtiums, as they say, but that was the attitude at the time. And yeah, and you know, and they'd happily get stuff. They'd happily, you know, send something to China and get it built there for a fraction of what it could be done in Australia, without even considering that, you know, we have a manufacturing industry and how important it is to Australia. They just didn't give a toss about any of that stuff. So that was a big lesson learned, and that was part of the reason. And whilst I was there was also a section that was doing, you know, landscape architecture, and watching those guys, it was a different attitude that they had to the interior designers. So the whole process of working in those companies was giving me a whole breadth of experience that was, you know, totally invaluable. When after getting retrenched at that time, I went and worked for a guy called Steve Wise Iron. He was up at Toowoomba. He's a bit of sort of hippie ironmongery type of person, and I would drive up there in my old combi on a Sunday night, camp in the combi, and he had an old ablutions block he'd scored, and I'd just sleep in my combi, and I'd work as a designer for him. And so we're doing all these forged iron things. I'd made the connection when I was doing Royal Pines Resort. I designed for the presidential suite kind of everything. So from the door finishes, the door handles, the door knobs, all the cabinetry, the dining table, the chairs, the light fittings, and it's the light fittings, and the light fittings were made in hand slump glass, and this guy, Steve Wise's company, had made the drawings that I'd given them. He'd made up the steel structures that were part of the. So there were up lights, there were hanging lights, there were torchios on the wall, and I designed all those using hand forged steel and hand slump glass. And so I got to know the guy, and so that's sort of kind of how the job came about. And so I'm working with him, and I'm designing hand forged steel. I've done a couple of restaurants and things like that. I've done little torchlier designs, wall sconces and stuff like that. But I'm thinking, about what I should do next myself, and I'm thinking about all the things I've learned and all the things I've done, and I'm sort of reverted back to, Hobart, the street furniture thing. Also, whilst I was lecturing in Launceston, I'd done some furniture for Franklin Square in Hobart as a job, as a project. So I'd actually had a bit of a dabble in street furniture even then, even though I was doing the sort of designing wood thing, and that was made of cast metal and timber. So I'd actually had a bit of a go at it. So I suppose I'd already, kind of been thinking around that idea, but I didn't consider it particularly glamorous, and I was more interested in, doing sort of furniture for homes and for offices and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But having had the experience of the interior designers and sort of seen how they treated suppliers in that industry and so on, I kind of concluded that the landscape architects were a kinder group of people, and also there really wasn't anything much in the market at all in the way of street furniture, especially not in the way of custom street furniture. There wasn't anything, zero. So I thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained kind of thing. And I kind of figured if I did it for a few years, I might convince people of my worth as a designer, and maybe someone would take the business off my hands, give me a job, or just give me a nice little payout or something like that. I don't know what I thought, but I didn't really think I'd be doing street furniture still 31 years later. I didn't think that was going to happen like that. So I had a bit of money saved from working for Media 5, and one of the people I'd worked with on Royal Pines Resort was a guy called Mark Dukas, and he was a salesman, and he was selling some furniture. I designed a couple of pieces for him that went into Royal Pines Resort that he built. So he came into the business with me initially, and the idea was that I would design things and he would sell them. And so we set up shop in Arthur Street, in what was the design centre there, which is an old wool store down the bottom end of the street there, near Commercial Road. And away we went, away we went there. That's right, we started there. So that sort of, it started out, the furniture sold to some degree, but my colleague, my co-proprietor was a bit inclined to enjoy a joint and a bottle of wine, at lunchtime. He was a nice guy, but not terribly focused. And I had this weird experience where I went to the bank in New Farm, Westpac. Dale Kurtz was the bank manager's name. And Dale said to me, he said, look, I reckon you're onto something here. I reckon this could go somewhere. But that partner of yours, he said, he's no good. You get rid of him and I'll give you an overdraft. And I mean, can you imagine a bank manager doing that these days?
Yeah.
And taking that risk of making a statement like that? And I took this on board, and I went back and I said to Mark, I said, look, mate, you've got to pull your finger out, there's opportunities here. And he said to me, the only good designers come out of Italy. That's what he said to me. I said, well, if that's your attitude, obviously, this is going to go nowhere. So he put in a few dollars. I put in most of the money. I owned the IP. He said, look, just give me back the money I've given you, and we'll call it quits. I thought, yeah, okay. But, I was wise enough to get my accountant to just check on the business and see what it was worth. And it was worth nothing. But I probably wouldn't have started the business without his encouragement. And, I was fond of the guy, I'd spent some time with him and I was fond of the guy, but nevertheless, business is business, and clearly, it wasn't going to go anywhere. So So I went back to him and I said, okay, you put in $5,000. Here's $5,000. No, he said, no, I want $50,000 and I want 50% of the profit of the business for the next 5 years. I went, bloody hell, what am I going to do? So I went to my solicitor and he said, okay, well, the business is worth nothing. You've only just started, it's worth nothing. You can just start, you can, choose a new name, you can wind up the current company structure, you can start again. And I said to him, well, I could do that, but that would be pretty dishonest. I mean, the guy did encourage him, he probably wouldn't have done it. I can sort of see it's got potential. It's worth something to me as it is. The name's already been kind of semi-established. So I said, I want to give him something, but obviously I can't give him what he's asked for. I said, so what are you prepared to go? I said, well, I'll double his money. I'll give him $10,000.
You're a fairer man than most.
And my solicitor said, you're crazy, but okay. He said, it was, I think, about 10 in the morning. He said, I'll give him to 12 today to make up his mind. It's $10,000 or nothing.
Yeah.
So he took the $10,000 and I thought, okay, well, I've done the right thing here. I've done the right thing here. I always feel okay about this. So I went into the office and I was feeling, I've done the right thing. And he put his face up to mine. He said, you miserable C. So,
Yeah.
what can I say?
Sometimes you can't help people.
I
might just discuss a few talking points now, just to get
sure. I will just ramble on otherwise.
That's all right. It's been great to get your background on the starting of the business, but just to talk to your design process. What process do you specifically follow when looking to design furniture or urban furniture in the area?
Okay, so a lot of our furniture is custom design. So what we do is we look for something that's unique to that particular place. So, or something that's considered unique about that place. Could be from the built environment, could be from the natural environment, could be just something that is sort of how people feel about the place. So for example, a good example of this one, probably the best example of this one in recent times would be Winton's Main Street that we did with RPS Group. Andrew Green, as he was then, he's now with Wild Studios. Bit of a pup there for Andrew. So Andrew asked us to design furniture for that particular place. Now, Qantas was established there, arguably. Longreach says it was there. Winton says it was there. The first meeting was in Winton, apparently. Waltzing Matilda was conceived there as well. The dinosaur thing, the dinosaur centre is associated with Winton. It's at Winton. Opal mining, sheep. So basically, in that instance, budgerigars actually as well. But so a combination of those things became the basis for ideas that are functional ideas, so sensible ideas, but the shade structures become wing-like for Qantas. They have birds incorporated into in a pattern. The seats have kind of like a corrugated iron come three-pronged toe dinosaur thing happening. W for Winton, if you like, as well. The sheep are still sheep. The outside the pubs, I did leaning rails because of the yarn thing, Waltzing Matilda having a yarn. So most of those sort of things, most of those type of projects, if you look at something like Bulcock Beach, it was about Pumice-Stone Passage. It's about everybody being able to see out to the water, so the tables are tapered. There's a pattern in the tables which is based on the Norfolk pine trees, which were planted there for ships' masts back in the day.
Mm.
Um, and shoals of fish because people fish there. There's sort of basic, understandable, but kind of abstract ideas, come into play. For something like Rockhampton, it would be water flow, airflow, and activation at night time. So seats have a lot of perforation in them. Perforation was devised from some air vents that we saw in the old buildings because we wanted at least some reference to the old buildings, but not to clash with them.
Yep.
Sort of Federation buildings there. The seats need to allow for water flow in flood. They needed to allow for airflow in the heat. And the best time to be there is at night time. So they turn into lanterns at night time. So there's a lot of that kind of thinking. For miles recently, it was bottle trees. So the furniture has sort of like a reference to bottle trees.
So in a way, you inspire your process through your background in art, in a way, to see it from more of a conceptual front, opposed to like a purely practical design front.
Yeah, that's right. So if you look at our website and you look at the furniture, you'll see that there's a fairly strong art bias.
Yeah, one thing I noticed about your furniture as well, I was in South Bank yesterday and I'm walking along and I'm like, I bet you that's one of his furniture pieces and then I looked and sure enough it was. And it's because it has such a distinct style. Like you have a very strong brand language around like the kind of designs you do.
Probably, yeah. I mean, yes, I try to for points of difference, of course, but there's a basic formula for things to perch people's bottoms on. There's a basic sort of angle, height, angle of the back, depth of seat. So there's basics there, and then beyond that, as I say, it really comes down to the aesthetics. Really come down to what says something about that place. It's about materials as well. What's suitable, heat dispersion, all those kind of things come into play. So, I think there probably is some sort of consistency of sort of thinking. I work as creative director, but I give my guys a fair bit of leeway in what the final outcome is. But I would say that, a lot of the ideas have been driven by a sketch or an idea or even some words that I've given them. And so I suppose, give a designer his own company and, that's kind of what's going to happen.
A lot of the time as a manager, I feel like that's a very powerful skill to have, being knowing when to actually give the designer the control.
Yeah, well, I've always thought it was important to, I didn't have it happen for me when I worked for people. I didn't get recognition for the work that I did. And as I pointed out, that translated into being retrenched from a company where, in fact, I was doing a good job for them. And they simply didn't know.
Yeah.
So with my guys and with the people that have worked here, you'll see that their names pop up in relation to the designs. I kind of took it a little bit too far. I kind of took my finger off the pulse a bit too far, and that caused me some problems with staffing because they started to think that I was a useless old coot, that I'd been around too long, that I no longer had a good idea to share, kind of thing, which was not the case. And evaluating sort of the work that they'd done, that they thought that they'd done themselves. In fact, there was a lot of, I've got sketches to prove that, in fact, the original concept was mine. But the point was that I kind of figured that sooner or later people do move on, and that if you've given them some credibility through literally saying that they were involved in that particular project, that would help their careers. And that was sort of what was behind what I did. As I say, it wasn't necessarily a good idea in its own way, but I won't stop doing it. It's I think you do hope that people respect why you do these things. It doesn't always happen, but that's what you hope for.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of sustainability, we kind of already spoke to it before, but I'd like to touch on it a bit further. As we spoke, currently the trends in furniture design aren't necessarily the best for longevity and sustainable manufacturing in general. Do
Mhm.
you think that in the future we'll move back towards these more sustainable processes of using, actual wood as opposed to MDF, and maybe, I don't know, using metal opposed to plastic, things like this?
Look, I think it's a matter of what's appropriate for the particular location, and unfortunately, people do not understand that MDF, is a sponge to all intents and purposes, and that it does soak up humidity. But um, it's a mindset, isn't it? And it's a price-driven thing as well. What I've found with our furniture, we work with the likes of Lend Lease and Hutchinson Builders, and these big companies, Stockland and so on. Now, initially, when we give them a price for something, they're not necessarily all that excited because it's kind of expensive. But our ideas are often presented by a third party, like an architect or a landscape architect, and what they're doing is they're saying, well, you're going to get longevity here, and you're going to get a point of difference.
Yeah.
And once they get past once they see the dollars is not nearly as important as the point of difference, and how that affects the dollars that they can get for the product they're selling, which is the land and houses or whatever. After a while, the cost of our furniture becomes negligible in the face of the insane amount of money they're going to make from the overall project. So for us, we can get away with using good materials, like at Southbank. I know the seats you saw there, but if it was the seat, the sort of green plastic concrete seat down near the wheel at Brisbane, but the seat slats on that, they're reversible. So they're countersunk both sides. You can flip them over, get another 15 years out of them. It's also first run plastic is fully recyclable. But a lot of our work is about building things that'll last. There's a lot of my furniture that I did right from the outset still around, like heaps of it.
Yeah.
In fact, most of it is still around. So the street furniture design for Brisbane CBD, which was one of my first major commissions, it's a lot of the old cast, it was done in cast metals. The cast metal thing was a reference to traditional street furniture, and it was a process that was readily available at the time here in Brisbane. Because of environmental issues, it's much harder to do now, but the process is pretty efficient. That street furniture actually, incidentally, has been changed to a fabricated steel and a steel process, so it's now fabricated. Now, I mean, it costs more than the cast metal. More people can build it, but it's when you're cutting up a piece of steel to do what they with a cast metal thing, you pour the metal in a hole. You use all that metal. You don't throw any away. Whatever's left from the process is cut off, chucked back in the cauldron, recycled, put into the next piece. There's no waste. When you're doing something laser cut, folded, making up whole lots of bits and pieces, and you're welding it together, if you're not considering how it's going to nest into the sheet of metal, you're wasting an awful lot of material.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, you have your ups and downs. And so I was in with Brisbane City Council, and then I wasn't in with Brisbane City Council. So, you don't always, and the reason I'm not in with Brisbane City Council is a very good one, if you don't mind me talking about this. And it's about design. The reason I'm not, I lost credibility with Brisbane City Council was about design. And basically what happened was that they decided they wanted to do a new accessible drinking fountain. And they wanted to sort of be an art piece as well, which was a nice idea, fine. But as an industrial designer, I thought, well, the first point of, I'd already done some disability accessible drinking fountains, and I'd sort of worked with a guy in a wheelchair to design those. So I had a pretty good clue as to how they should function. And, there's a sort of thing about, the strength of someone's hand, the weight of their hand. So I'd end up incorporating levers and stuff like that to get mechanical advantage and, certain width to allow for access in a wheelchair, and, thin so that there was plenty of clearance. And I had a good long, hard think about it. And I'd worked with this guy in a wheelchair, and he tested but when the council thing came out, I thought, well, this is a really prime opportunity to really do this properly, make up a jig, work out exactly the best format for this drinking fountain, so that it's the most effective configuration, height, all elements of it from a design perspective will deliver water to that person's mouth as efficiently as possible. And that, the process of delivering that water through mechanisms and so on will be, totally considered. So I kind of knew that was sort of a criticism of council's process if I explained this to them. And I agonised over whether to do it. I knew there was egos involved, and I knew it could be a problem for me. But I thought, I've got to be honest about this, and this is what I think. So I wrote an email, or actually probably a fax at that stage, to council, and I explained all this to them. I explained, my thinking behind it, and I mean, the thing had already gone out to tender and so on. It's, without that, but it wasn't too late, really. I mean, it could have been done as an addendum sort of thing without it being a problem.
Yep.
And I offered to help out with that process. I offered to, get an engineer to help with the process of working this thing out. Well, I got a call on a Sunday from David Hinchliffe, actually, criticising me for criticising council. Like, I got a real ass kicking from a trouble. Like, I really got into some serious trouble over this.
I think this is a bit of a problem with councils and governments. Sometimes they don't take criticism very well.
No. So basically, I didn't get a gong. I didn't get to design this fountain. I wasn't one of the people selected to do the fountain. And there was another problem with a project, and where the local community selected colours for this. It's at Carina, and the local community selected colours for this furniture that I designed for them, in sort of greens and browns. And the furniture was painted, and it was coming up to Christmas, and it was ready to install. And a guy from council came back to me and said, I want to change the colours to blue and grey. I said, mate, it's finished, it's ready to install. And, we've all been to these community groups, and the community groups decided on the colours that they want. Well, I don't like them, so I want to change the colours. I said, well, it can be done, but I can't do it straight away. And I mean, there'll be a cost involved. No, it's your fault, my fault. I said, how do you see that? Well, it doesn't matter. The thing is, there's a budget, and, we need to repaint it, and you have to do it at your cost. I said, well, honestly, that's, a bit unreasonable. Do you think we could have a discussion about this? And they basically said to me, either you do it or you don't get any work from council again. So I had to do it. But the thing is, I had to do it. I did it, but I didn't get any more work from council. Like, I'd upset them. And it wasn't my fault. So it was bloody unreasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing with Brisbane Council is, I feel, well, like design in general, is it's not particularly designed very well at all.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
All you got to do is look at the Gold Coast lights when you drive on the motorway.
Yeah.
Great design.
Crazy design, those ones. They're just, you can't even read them. It's just...
Yeah, you can't even read it. And then there's also our basically complete lack of transportation, public transportation, considering how big our city is now.
Well, and the Goldie sort of did these concrete seats. I mean, the concrete seat is a heat sink.
Yeah.
Gold
Coast is pretty hot.
It's just stupid. Don't say too much, David, because we do a lot of concrete seats, but it doesn't stack up, like
Yeah.
concrete seats are in this climate here are just stupid. And down south, it's just as silly because effectively they become a cold sink,
Yeah.
and they're not good to sit on in cool weather. They're basically a bad idea.
Mm.
But we do a lot of them, so shut up, David.
Uh, can
Just
you talk about the process of working with manufacturers and suppliers to bring a design to life?
Uh-huh.
So I feel like that's an important part of furniture design, being able to understand the processes and design for the processes specifically. So yeah, maybe if you could speak to that.
Yeah, we're very fortunate here in Brisbane, in particular, and in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, to have some fantastic manufacturers, some really good manufacturers. I mean, it's not that they don't cock things up from time to time, but overall, the facilities are there.
Mm.
I mean, it pays to design to the facilities you've got, but we have got a lot of different types of facilities that we have access to. And generally speaking, they're pretty efficient.
Yeah.
They're not as cost effective as getting something in from overseas. Of course, they're not.
Mm.
But I've taken the view that we should support local manufacturing, because if we
Yeah.
don't, we simply won't have those facilities available
Yeah.
to us. So we basically build everything locally, and I mean, they rise to the occasion. I mean, they we needed to be able to bead blast things, so they brought in a bead blast. We needed to do some tube laser cutting, so they got a tube laser. I mean, obviously we give them a decent volume of work and they can use it for other clients and so on, but they've been very responsive to sort of the ideas that we have, and it's just extraordinary what they can build. We recently did a rubbish bin, to get excited about rubbish bin. We recently did a rubbish bin for Miles Town Centre, and I mean, the thing is just, if I'm allowed to say so, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful object.
This is the joke in design. You see a really nice design rubbish bin and you respect it.
This is down to our ideas, I'd like to think, but it's also down to the quality of manufacturing. It's just beautifully built.
Yeah.
The gaps, the join lines, everything's just perfect. The only cock up is that they put the hinges on the outside instead of the inside, and I don't know how that happened. So I've photoshopped it out in my phone. but
maybe you can say it was on purpose. It gives it a bit of a, I don't know.
No,
look.
It's just wrong because it's not even rounded in the corners. There's no detail there. And I love detail. So there's but other than that, I mean, really, I kind of looked at those things and a couple of other things we did up there, and I just thought, it's just incredible what we can build here in Brisbane. We did these quite complex seat ends in flat metal bar, and they're three-dimensional. And I mean, I didn't know whether we could actually build it, and they did. And it's got a few joins and things, but you can't see them. They've blended it all in perfectly. It's just incredible. So
yeah,
I couldn't do that in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
I couldn't. I'd have to go to Kalamazoo or somewhere like that. I couldn't get the resources we've got here in a relatively small geographic. I couldn't get in America.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. The skill level and the facilities that are available is incredible here in Brisbane.
Yeah, I think you're in a way you're in a lucky space, because I feel like with traditional product design, it can be quite hard to not manufacture overseas due to small scale organizations that can't afford to produce in Australia. But because a lot of your clients are like government bodies and large organizations, you can, which is really good.
Yeah, so we do bigger projects, and we do projects that last for sometimes for 15, 20, 30 years. So we do housing estates that just keep on going.
Yeah. So
we produce volumes of product, and we have them ready to go as they require them. So we actually stockpile some product. We one of our main things is actually the drinking fountain. It's a drinking fountain, I was grizzling about. So one of our main products is drink foam. We don't sell them to Brisbane City Council. We sell them to everybody else. Brilliant design, of course. That, you know, that thing is quite complex, but we can build that here without any problems, you know. And so we generally make multiples of those, and we sell them regularly. And probably what would be nice, we're hoping to you know, do a bit more overseas, and if we do, we'll be able to probably get an industrial designer to design a new mechanism for us. At the moment, we're using sort of off-the-shelf components, which are not absolutely ideal for the delivering of the water. They do the job, and you know, they're reasonably well considered within the constraints of what their limitations are. But it would be really good to do our own and have, you know, that sort of side of the product sorted out. Would be great. So that's something that, you know, I'm hoping that we can do if we get into more volume in somewhere like, you know, the States.
As far as collaborating with interior designers, do you still collaborate with other interior design agencies, or do you see yourself more as a industrial design focused organization now? Or a blend of both?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we'll pretty much do anything. I mean, certainly this office here designed everything pretty much.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I found it really amazing when I was there looking around. You can see all these little, even on the door, the door handle, you can see you guys did that. Yeah, it's really cool.
Even the toilet roll holders, and they're set up so you can put a beer on them.
Oh, that's great.
I even did the vase in the bathroom. I got a local glass blower to do a shape because I couldn't get the shape I wanted, so I got one made. So we could do a lot of more interior work if people are interested in doing it. It's a different area, and as I said from the outset of this conversation, it's a much tougher area. There's a lot of people sort of in that area. It's sort of considered fairly glamorous, and the reality is that, you know, it's dollar driven, a lot more so than what we do. But from time to time, people ask us, you know, they see what we've done here, and you know, there's potential in that area, but you know, by request, I would certainly be interested in doing it. Mostly what I've done is my own offices, you know, and we've done a few domestic sort of gates and stuff like that, but they're still kind of more or less street furniture related or related to it, you know, our external works. We could probably be doing, we could definitely be doing, you know, cafe furniture and stuff like that. But a lot of those things are really seriously price driven. $100 chair kind of thing. Well, you can't do much for $100 and sell it for $100. You know, you just can't do it. So you know, most of that stuff's imported, which is unfortunate. I mean, what we can do is picnic settings and stuff like that, but we can't, you know, we can't compete with tables and things like that. We have done them. We've done them. We did a job at Sealy for Sealy mattress people, and we did all their tables things. So we did buy chairs, but we did picnic settings and tables and stuff for those guys.
Yeah, good. Do you have any advice for aspiring industrial designers / entrepreneurs looking to start their own business? Maybe even myself.
Well, if you were listening to the outset of my conversation, I know you were. What I was trying to say to you there was, of course, you know, there's nothing like a bit of experience, and one way of getting that experience is to go and work for other people and suck it up a bit. You know, it's you know, you've I think your own work, you know, to continue to design things yourself, understanding processes and finding resources that will allow you to build the things that you want to build. You know, even in small volumes, there's people that can do that, or certainly processes that you can use that to do that. I mean, just um, evaluating, who can do what in your local area, and of course offshore potentially as well. I mean, so to put this in a little bit of perspective from my point of view, something I didn't talk about is that when I was a student, I wanted to do what you're talking about. I wanted to do some product right back then. So the first thing I did was a chair, sort of like an IKEA chair, but one that actually lasts. So this one was made of steel, and what I did was the first few prototypes I went to an exhaust pipe manufacturer and they folded up some 2-inch tube for the sides of the seat and some 25 mm tube for the internal frame of the seat. So it's like a cantilever seat, like one of those laminated seats at IKEA, laminated side seats a similar sort of seat to that, canvas sling, foam cushions and so on. So with that thing, so the initial learning curve was draw the thing up, find resources to build it. So I found a lady that could do the sewing and stuff like that. I got some little labels made up in Melbourne, so it had a tag on it, like a Levi's tag or whatever, so it had that sort of professional look to it. I got some boxes made up with logos on them. I had a friend of mine at college do a logo for me. So the idea was that I would present this product as a proper professional product that came from a bigger company, not my backyard,
Yeah.
So eventually I went to a company called Tube Makers, who are still around, and they had sort of some semi CNC, I don't know what it would have been then. It would have been mechanical, wouldn't have been computerized, but they could fold up all the parts. But to do it, I had to buy this massive amount of parts, So this bloody great big box turns up with all these greasy bits of metal in it, but all bent up to the right shape and all that. So it's my first sort of shot at a bit of mass production, And as I say, I'd found someone who could cut up the fabric, and I got zippers from YKK, because the fabric had sort of sleeves and you slide your sides into it, the front and back, and then pull up this flap and pull across the zipper, and that held the thing together. I got some little injection molded saddles made so that the sides between the 50mm and 25mm tube, I had some little saddles so that they would sit nice and square. I got some bolts from Unbreako, hex head bolts. So I had to source the canvas from someone in Melbourne, zips from YKK, injection molded components, foam from a foam place that sort of cut it up for me. And then I would go down and the lady that did the upholstery, I'd go down with a pair of, she told me what scissors to buy. I went down, I'd cut out all the patterns, and then she would sew it up. Boxed it all up. I managed to sell them to people like Myers and David Jones. They didn't realise I was this, one person. They thought that they were from some sort of corporate. Oh, yeah, and the end cap plugs, I had to get those made as well. So, like fully presented, professionally presented product, and I got away with it. But it really wasn't cost effective. I mean, I wasn't making a cracker out of it, but I learned a lot. I learned about not having too many components and how much hassle it was to bring all things together. And because there was painting involved, and there was chroming involved, and there was a whole lot of shit that I had to do to make this thing work, But, I learned a lot from that. So the second thing I did was a wall clock. Now, the wall clock only required the box, piece of timber, a face, glass, and a mechanism. So, and if I use that same piece of timber for a bowl, it was worth $30. And if I made it into a clock, it was worth $100, $150. Same piece of timber with a minor addition and a minor cost addition for the components to make it into a clock.
Mm.
And then I scored an old lathe and I turned it into a faceplate lathe so I could turn the things up quickly on the lathe. And then I found someone in South Australia, Hammersmith Wood Turning, who could do the things on a lathe that held the timber on with air pressure.
Okay.
They could do repetition for me, so I could send the timber over to them and they could produce these the sort of wooden surround, this wooden sort of wall clock that I was doing. But certain timbers were so porous that the air would suck through them and they wouldn't stay on the faceplate. So everything you're doing is, you're learning something. Like I did a multicolored face to start off with. It was a lot more expensive than black and white. That was pretty logical, but and I found a different person to print them, and so that process, and that sort of all happened before I went overseas when I got my grant, and then everything else that I've spoken about came after that. But so I'd already dabbled in that idea of being an entrepreneur and selling these products, and I'd sold those clocks in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane, and I'd roll up in, I'd fly to Sydney, I'd hire a car, I'd roll up with a box full of boxes of clocks. I'd go into a little shop that was selling knickknacks, and I'd go in and they'd smile because they thought they were going to sell me something. And then their face would go like this because I was going to try and sell them something. So then I had to convince them that what I was selling them was, worth having. And like, I was probably a bit cocky. I just, didn't think long and hard about it. I just sort of thought that what I was selling was worthwhile. And they'd say yes, and then I'd go to the car and bring them in,
Yeah.
And I got repeat business. So basically, believe in yourself, be bold, find something, have a think about what you're doing, think about the processes involved, the complications involved, think about something that has value added to it. That's, so in my case, I was talking about a bowl and a clock, the difference between the two things, perceived value.
Yeah.
It's like the difference between a chair and a bed, for example. A bed's bigger, but takes no more time to build than a bloody chair, but a chair's worth a whole lot less. Same thing with a table. So, you think about the object, its functionality and its perceived value, and look at sort of the existing market for something similar. You design something better, or more interesting, or funky, or whatever it might be, and then you boldly step forward and promote it. I mean, these days you've got much more avenues to promote it, but the best form of promotion is still face-to-face. Doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely.
Social media, doesn't matter what you do.
The hard thing I'm finding now is like I have an idea for a better product from a previous, I'm not going to specifically mention it, but from a previous workplace I worked at, I basically have an idea for a better product. When I worked as like not a designer, just as a standard worker, I realized there was a problem, and there isn't really a solution. It's ridiculously unsustainable what they're doing right now. And it's a relatively simple solution from my mind on how to fix it. But the problem I'm finding is, how do you communicate with a massive corporation and try and get like to the top to talk to someone who's actually going to be able to fund it?
You're a cheeky bastard. You just turn up and...
No, but like, there's no head office in Queensland. Fly to Sydney.
You talk about the idea. You don't present the idea in itself.
Yeah, okay.
You talk around the idea. You don't give them... You don't even verbally give them the idea. You explain the problem, and you explain that there is a solution. If you've got sort of some ideas, or you can do a prototype, a 3D print or something like that, model, you say, I'd like to show this to you. It'll save you X amount of dollars. You try and do some background on what those dollars might be, what the saving could be. It could be in how it's produced. It could be in the machinery that they don't need as opposed to the machinery they do need. It could be all those sort of factors.
think as well, even like from like a futurist perspective, where these big corporations are becoming more and more scrutinized for being unsustainable. So it's
Yeah.
almost like a competitive advantage to start removing major
All right. Well, you point that
unsustainability.
out to them. That's
Yeah.
exactly what you do.
Mm.
And you explain the idea without giving the idea away.
Yeah.
You make them want to become that you intrigue them enough so they want to talk to you.
Mm.
Um, I've got another little anecdote for you here, and maybe we're running out of time, but I've got another little anecdote for you here about design and sustainability and all that.
Mm.
And this is about being a 21-year-old and having a motorcycle accident, and and being out of action for a year, at least a year. I smashed my lower limb and I really badly.
Mm.
Like I broke both bones and it was reset bad. It was very bad.
Mm.
So um, so I found myself in a position of having to use orthopedic crutches, and they were clumsy because they're big long things. And they're awkward. They're awkward. Like I had to travel on buses and stuff like that, and if I wanted to go to the pictures or anything like that, they were a bloody nuisance.
Mm.
It's crutches. So, and also you're using them a lot. They damage your underside of your arm. They can actually pinch your nerves and cause you some serious nerve damage and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So, being a potential industrial designer, an emerging industrial designer, I thought, well, this is a problem to solve.
Mm.
So I took a mold of my then girlfriend's armpit, and I made it a left and a right, because armpits are obviously not left and well, they're left and rights, but they're not universal.
Mm.
So I got the general shape from doing that.
Mm.
I put that on a pivot so that the articulation was happening. That was staying still whilst you're still ambulating, or you're still using the crutches. And motor mowers have a simple mechanism for the way they fold the pushing thing,
Mm.
the handle. And so they have a little crimp idea, and you just have a bolt goes through and it locks the handle in place. So I just borrowed that idea, and I formed a shape that was sort of integrally spring loaded. So the shape of the top of the crutch was sort of like rounded
Mm.
and loaded integrally. And so I could then put a bolt through it and put a wing nut. So you could undo the wing nut and you could fold the leg up. So the crutches were half the size. You could move the hand rest up and down as well. And once you locked up the lower leg of the thing and did up the nut, it also pitched the hand rest in position so it didn't move around. Now, I actually got on the ABC Inventors, which was a program they had on TV back then, and I presented these things. I got beaten by a wooden mousetrap, which is and a water divining device on them. So I didn't win any prizes or anything, but I did get some serious exposure for this thing. So I got approached by a company that sold crutches, and the long and short of it is that although my idea was better, way better, and much better for the end user and all that, the fact of the matter is that they were importing crutches from China or wherever for next to nothing.
Yeah.
They were considered disposable.
Mm.
So I made a few pairs. That was it. So it doesn't matter. So sometimes, so if you look at it from that perspective, bloody good idea.
Yeah.
But no commercial value. No commercial. It doesn't matter that it was a better idea. No commercial value. So again, another little learning curve for me.
I suppose that's the interesting thing about design. Like sometimes you can have the best design, but if the market's not ready for it, it won't happen.
No, that's right.
Even with the keyboard, there's a better keyboard design that came out in like the 50s or something. Better layout because basically one hand's using more energy than the other. But it was never picked up because people were too used to the current keyboard design. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
that's
right.
what it is. Uh, well, yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there because I think we've
Yeah.
we've got so much information, and I'm sure the podcast listeners will be sitting here trying to process all this information. And yeah, it's great. Thanks so much for coming on, David. It's been really great to get your background
Not
over
at
the
all.
last
Not at
what
all.
40 years almost.
Oh, so yeah, as I say, I finished my course in 79, but I'd already started designing stuff by about 1975. I'd started to designing stuff. So it's good.
A long time. But yeah,
It's a while ago.
and yeah, well, yeah, thank you for coming on board, and yeah, I'm sure we'll keep our communication open in the future.
No problem.
Cool.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
your
Have a
time.
good day. I'll talk to
You
you later.
too. See ya.